Hey everyone, and welcome back to Sip and Talk. It's Joe here.
Hey!
With my awesome co-host, Sunny.
Always ready to sip and talk.
Are you ready for another deep dive?
Especially about today's juicy topic.
Sunny, you are not going to believe this.
Oh, Joe, what happened?
I finally caved and tried those instant bubble tea kits everyone's raving about online.
Did you accidentally make boba concrete?
Disaster.
Oh, Joe.
An absolute disaster. The tapioca pearls turned into these rock-hard pebbles. I think I chipped a tooth.
Pretty much.
This time we're sticking to takeout, right?
Definitely. Sometimes DIY is DI don't, haha.
Speaking of things best left to the pros, today we're diving into a topic that's got a lot of folks buzzing, especially online.
Ooh, that's a spicy one.
We're talking about the claim that the U.S. won't protect Taiwan.
There's a lot of history strategy and, frankly, strong opinions swirling around this issue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it can be tough to separate fact from fiction, especially with so much information and misinformation flying around. So we've been doing some serious sipping and researching to break it down for you. We want to understand what's really going on with this whole U.S.-Taiwan-China triangle.
Right. We're not here to take sides or tell you what to think.
Right.
We just want to unpack the key issues and get you thinking critically.
Okay, so first things first, why is Taiwan such a big deal on the global stage? It's a relatively small island, right?
You'd be surprised. Taiwan might be small geographically.
Yeah.
But it packs a huge punch when it comes to technology.
Silicon Heartland. You mean like Silicon Valley, but in Asia?
In fact, it's basically a world Silicon Heartland.
Oh, wow.
Even bigger than that. Taiwan is the global leader in semiconductor manufacturing. Right. And we're not just talking about any chips. We're talking about the cutting-edge, super advanced chips that power everything from smartphones and laptops to military hardware and artificial intelligence.
Okay, so remind me again why these tiny chips are so important. They're in everything, sure.
Right.
But what makes them so special?
These aren't your grandma's computer chips, Joe.
Okay.
We're talking about incredibly complex, miniaturized pieces of technology. And there's one company in Taiwan that's the undisputed king of the chip game, TSMC.
TSMC. That name rings a bell. They're pretty much the Beyonce of the semiconductor world, right?
Exactly. TSMC controls a staggering 60% of the global market share for semiconductor fabrication. But here's the kicker. They hold a whopping 90% market share for the most advanced chips.
90%.
The ones that are driving innovation in fields like AI and quantum computing.
Whoa, 90%. That's insane. I'm starting to see why everyone's so interested in what happens with Taiwan.
Right. Imagine a world without the chips made in Taiwan.
Yeah.
Your phone, your car, your smart fridge, even your fancy coffee maker would be toast.
Okay, so Taiwan is basically the Willy Wonka of microchips.
But you mentioned something earlier about it being strategically important, too.
Absolutely. It's not just about the economic impact. Taiwan's location is incredibly significant geopolitically.
Okay.
Ever heard of the first island chain?
That sounds vaguely familiar.
Yeah.
Refresh my memory.
Think of it like a giant chain of islands stretching from Japan down to the Philippines. This chain acts as a natural barrier limiting China's access to the Pacific Ocean.
Okay.
And guess who sits right smack dab in the middle of that chain?
Taiwan. Okay, I'm starting to see the strategic significance here.
Right.
It's like Taiwan is this key piece on a giant geopolitical chessboard.
Exactly. And if China were to gain control of Taiwan, they'd have a much easier time projecting their naval power into the Pacific. That could potentially threaten U.S. military bases in the region and shift the balance of power in Asia.
So basically everyone is watching Taiwan because it's a tech powerhouse, a strategic linchpin in the region. Talk about a lot of pressure for one little island.
It's definitely a lot to handle, especially when you consider that Taiwan's fate is so intertwined with the actions of larger powers like the U.S. and China.
Right. And that brings us to the heart of the matter, this whole debate about whether or not the U.S. would actually defend Taiwan if things got heated.
It's a complex question.
Yeah.
And to understand it, we need to dive into the murky waters of international relations, specifically a concept called realism.
Realism. Okay. I'm intrigued. Is this like that gritty documentary I watched last week? What does it have to do with global politics?
Not quite.
Okay.
In international relations, realism basically means that countries act primarily to protect and advance their own interests. It's not about being good guys or bad guys. It's about hard calculations of power and strategy.
So basically, countries are like that friend who always orders the biggest slice of pizza, even if they know you're still hungry.
That's one way to put it.
Okay.
But in all seriousness, realism suggests that nations are primarily motivated by self-preservation and the pursuit of their own goals, even if that means making tough choices that might seem morally questionable.
Okay, so how does this realism thing play out in the real world? Give me an example.
Let's rewind back to 1979.
Okay.
Remember when we talked about the U.S. recognizing the People's Republic of China, mainland China, instead of the Republic of China, Taiwan?
That seemed like a pretty big deal. Basically, the U.S. switched sides, right?
Exactly.
Wow.
And it was a move driven purely by realist calculations.
Okay.
The U.S. saw an opportunity to partner with China to counter the Soviet Union during the Cold War.
Wow.
It was a strategic decision to advance their own interests, even if it meant turning their back on Taiwan.
Wow, that's cold.
Yeah.
So Taiwan got caught in the crossfire of a global power struggle.
It sounds like the U.S. isn't always the most reliable friend when it comes to geopolitics.
You're catching on. And it's not just a historical example.
Right.
Remember the chaotic U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021?
Yeah, that was a rough one. After 2 decades of support, the U.S. pulled out.
Right.
And the Afghan government collapsed almost immediately.
It's another example of how U.S. foreign policy is guided by realism.
They made a calculated decision to withdraw, even if it meant abandoning their Afghan allies.
Wow.
Because they felt it was in their best interest to do so.
So if we're applying this realism lens to the U.S.-Taiwan relationship, it means we can't just assume that the U.S. will automatically come to Taiwan's rescue if China decides to flex its muscles right.
Precisely. We need to look beyond the rhetoric and examine the underlying motivations and interests at play.
Okay, so let's break it down. What are some common assumptions about U.S. support for Taiwan?
Okay.
And how do they hold up against this whole realism thing?
Let's start with the big one. The assumption that the U.S. is legally obligated to defend Taiwan if China attacks.
I mean, I always thought that was the case. Don't they have a treaty or something?
Not quite.
Really?
The U.S. has a policy of strategic ambiguity when it comes to Taiwan.
Okay.
They've never explicitly stated whether or not they would intervene militarily.
Wait, so they're deliberately being vague. Why would they do that?
It's all about keeping China guessing. The U.S. wants to deter China from taking any aggressive action, but they also don't want to provoke them unnecessarily.
Right.
It's a delicate balancing act.
So it's like a high-stakes poker game with Taiwan stuck in the middle.
Exactly. And both the U.S. and China are trying to play their cards close to the chest.
Okay, what about all the weapons the U.S. sells to Taiwan? Isn't that a sign of their commitment to Taiwan's security?
It's definitely part of the equation, but we can't ignore the fact that arms sales are also a big business for the U.S. military-industrial complex.
Ah, so there's a financial incentive at play here, too.
Absolutely. And sometimes the types of weapons being sold might not even be the most effective for Taiwan's specific defense needs.
Okay.
For example, the U.S. has been pushing Taiwan to buy expensive F-16 fighter jets. But some experts argue that those jets might not be the best option for countering China's gray zone warfare tactics.
Gray zone warfare, that sounds kind of ominous. What is that exactly?
It basically refers to actions that fall below the threshold of traditional warfare, like cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, and economic coercion. It's a way for China to exert pressure and undermine Taiwan without resorting to a full-blown invasion.
So it's like fighting in the shadows using tactics that are hard to counter with traditional military hardware.
Exactly. And in that kind of scenario, mobile anti-ship missiles, advanced drones, and robust cyber defenses might be more valuable than a fleet of fancy fighter jets.
Okay, so it's not always about providing Taiwan with the best possible defense. It's also about what's best for U.S. businesses and strategic interests.
You're getting it. Now, ready to debunk another common assumption.
Hit me with it.
The assumption that the U.S. supports Taiwan primarily because it's a democracy.
Yeah, I've definitely heard that narrative before. It's the classic freedom-loving America supporting a fellow democracy against the big, bad authoritarian China story.
It makes for a compelling narrative.
Right.
But if we look at history, the U.S. hasn't always been so consistent in its support for democracies.
Okay.
They've often backed non-democratic regimes if it aligned with their strategic interests.
So again, it comes back to that cold, hard realism.
Exactly. The U.S.'s foreign policy decisions are ultimately driven by what they perceive to be in their best interest, not necessarily by abstract ideals.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here.
Good.
But it gets even more interesting when you consider how individual personalities and perspectives can influence this whole U.S.-Taiwan-China dynamic.
Right. And to illustrate that, let's take a look at 2 very different but equally fascinating figures.
Okay.
Donald Trump and Elon Musk.
Whoa, talk about a dynamic duo. What do a flamboyant former president and a tech billionaire have to do with Taiwan?
Believe it or not, their contrasting views on Taiwan offer valuable insights into how personal interests and motivations can shape global politics. Shall we dive in?
Let's do it. But first, I need to refill my boba back in a sec. All right, Sunny Boba refilled, ready to tackle the rest of this Taiwan situation.
Okay.
You were about to tell me about Trump and Elon Musk. What are their takes?
Well, they're both powerful figures with a global platform, but their approaches to Taiwan couldn't be more different.
Okay.
Trump, during his presidency, seemed like Taiwan's biggest hype man.
Right.
He boosted U.S.-Taiwan relations, passed the Taipei Act, approved massive arms sales, and sent high-level officials to Taiwan.
So he was basically waving a red flag in front of Beijing. Kind of risky, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
But while his actions pleased Taiwan, Trump's motivations were more about countering China and gaining an advantage in trade negotiations than prioritizing Taiwan's security. Remember his America First agenda. Everything was about putting American interests first, even if it meant ruffling feathers on the global stage.
So basically, he was playing 4D chess using Taiwan as a pawn in his bigger game against China.
Pretty much. He even bragged, if it weren't for me, Taiwan would have been gone a long time ago.
Wow.
But here's the thing.
Okay.
While he was all about being tough on China regarding Taiwan, his stance on Ukraine paints a different picture.
Okay, how so? Didn't he also want to be buddy-buddy with Putin?
Exactly. He withheld military aid to Ukraine and even pressured their president to dig up dirt on his political rival. And now he's claiming he could end the war in Ukraine in a day, even if it means forcing Ukraine to make concessions to Russia.
So it sounds like his foreign policy was more about deal-making, even at the expense of allies, rather than a genuine commitment to supporting democracy.
That's the thing with Trump. His motivations were often hard to pin down, but self-interest definitely played a big role. Now let's jump to the other end of the spectrum, Elon Musk.
Right.
He has a more business-focused perspective on Taiwan.
Makes sense. Tesla has a massive factory in China, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't want to upset his biggest customer.
He even suggested that Taiwan should become a special administrative region of China, like Hong Kong, to ease tensions.
Really?
He also criticized U.S. military support for Taiwan, fearing it could lead to war and disrupt Tesla's operations in China.
Wow. So while Trump might have used Taiwan as a bargaining chip in a global power play, Elon seems more concerned with protecting his business interests.
It highlights how individual agendas and calculations can impact international relations. And it brings us back to the crucial question.
Okay.
If U.S. support for Taiwan is so intertwined with its own interests, what happens when those interests shift?
Right. We can't just assume things will stay the same forever, especially with all the global uncertainty these days.
Exactly. The war in Ukraine offers a valuable parallel.
Okay.
The U.S. is providing significant support to Ukraine, but they're doing so strategically, trying to weaken Russia without triggering a wider conflict. They haven't offered Ukraine NATO membership, for example, because that would risk direct confrontation with Russia.
So they're playing a careful game, trying to support Ukraine without crossing a line that would escalate things.
Precisely.
Right.
And there's growing fatigue in the U.S. regarding the level of support they're providing to Ukraine.
Right.
This means that even though the U.S. is a strong supporter of Taiwan right now, that support is ultimately based on its own calculations, which can change over time.
That's a sobering thought. So if we can't blindly rely on the U.S. to protect Taiwan, what options does Taiwan have? Can they even stand up to a giant like China?
This is where the concept of self-reliance comes in.
Okay.
Taiwan needs to be prepared to defend itself with or without direct U.S. intervention.
Okay, so what does self-reliance actually look like? Are we talking about building a giant robot army or something?
Not quite. It's about building a comprehensive defense strategy that plays to Taiwan's strengths.
Okay.
They need to invest in areas where they have a natural advantage, like asymmetric warfare.
Asymmetric warfare sounds fancy. What does that mean exactly?
It's about leveraging agility and innovation to counter an opponent's size and strength.
Okay.
Think mobile anti-ship missiles that can be quickly deployed and moved around, making them hard to target, or advanced drones that can provide surveillance and reconnaissance, or robust cyber defenses to repel attacks on critical infrastructure.
So it's like being the David to China's Goliath, using clever tactics and technology to even the playing field.
Exactly. It's about making any potential invasion as costly and difficult for China as possible. It also means strengthening their reserve forces and training programs, preparing their citizens to defend their homeland.
So basically turning everyone into a weekend warrior.
Well, it's more about instilling a sense of shared responsibility for defense and building a resilient citizenry. But hey, maybe some weekend warrior training camps wouldn't hurt either.
I'd sign up for that. But military strength is only part of the equation, right?
Right. Taiwan also needs to cultivate strong diplomatic relationships with other countries in the region and beyond. Think Japan, South Korea, Australia, even European nations who are concerned about China's growing assertiveness.
So basically building a global squad of friends who have their back. Safety in numbers.
Yeah, exactly. By diversifying their partnerships and forming alliances, Taiwan can enhance their security and deter Chinese aggression.
Okay.
And let's not forget their economic clout.
Right.
They hold a powerful card with their dominance in the semiconductor industry.
Right. Those chips are like gold and everyone wants them.
Exactly. They need to leverage that economic power to their advantage, making Taiwan indispensable to the global economy.
Wow. Sunny, you've painted a really clear picture of how Taiwan can navigate this tricky situation. It's not just about relying on the U.S., it's about taking control of their own destiny.
Exactly. Building a resilient economy, a strong military, and a network of international partnerships. That's the key to Taiwan's future security.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners? What can we learn from this whole Taiwan situation?
The world is a complex and constantly evolving place. We can't just passively consume information.
Right.
We need to challenge assumptions, dig deeper, and form our own opinions.
So basically be critical thinkers and stay informed.
Precisely. The more we understand these global issues, the better equipped we'll be to navigate the complexities of the world.
Well said, Sunny. And speaking of navigating complexities, I think I need another boba after all this brainpower exertion. Maybe we should check out our friend Micky's YouTube channel, Micky-to-Life, for a bit of a mental palate cleanser.
Perfect idea. He's got travel vlogs, whiskey reviews, alcohol unboxing videos, something for everyone.
Sounds like just what we need to unwind after this deep dive. So until next time, folks, keep sipping, stay curious, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Cheers to that.